This is Legends of '84, the story of BYU's remarkable national championship football team, told by the men who changed the world of college football and were forever transformed by that unforgettable season.
We knew we were going to be good. How good? Nobody knows.
I just never thought we'd lose. And each game that we won, we got more and more confident.
But once we played next to each other, we protected one another.
If you're not willing to prepare, then you're not going to be ready to win.
We are a peculiar people. We need to embrace that.
Brigham Young University has won the Holiday Bowl 24-17, and the Cougars are the only undefeated team in the nation. And I think they'll be number one.
Lee Johnson will try a field goal now from the 37-yard line, so it's a 47-yard attempt. Mark Allen holding for BYU.
As again, it's always direction for Lee. It's never distance. It'll be plenty long enough. It's just a matter of direction.
Here's the kick. Good distance. And it looks good. It is.
We ran track where they practiced football. And my buddies who were on the football team ran over to me and said, hey, come over here and show the coach how you can kick. So I went over and I kicked a couple field goals outside of 50. And the next day I was in a football uniform. That's how I started playing football. It just became part of me and what I did. I was good at it, so I stuck with it. I'm Lee Johnson, kicker.
Might be a game of field goals, as here's Lee Johnson to try again. He hit one earlier in the game to give BYU the lead, 3-0, and he'll try once again. Here's the kick, and it is good. So Johnson is 2 for 2, and on the year...
I punt in high school and kick in high school with a shoe on. And the summer before I walk on at BYU, I'm out on a hot summer day with my dad kicking the ball around at the Woodlands High School. And I take my shoe off and I missiled this football. It like shot out of a cannon. I could not believe the impact. That's how I became a Shoeless Wonder. And I took it to BYU and ended up taking it to the NFL, but realized I could not do what I needed to do with the bare foot because whenever the grass gets wet, it would make it very difficult. Because I was slipped. So I realized if I'm going to have an NFL career, I got to figure out a way. So I played 3 years with the shoe off. And then when I went to Cincinnati, I put a shoe on and extended my career.
Here's Johnson kicking off for Brigham Young. He drives this one pretty deep. Let's see if it'll go out of the end zone. And hit the goalpost.
Kicked that one right out of the stadium.
Yeah, he kicked that one hard.
Being the kicker on a pivotal play is, for me, not a natural thing at all. It's not what I ever wanted to be, aspired to be. Some of these great guys, these amazing kickers, punters, or whatever, athletes, they want that pressure. I want no part of it. And whenever I would get into the situation, my whole body would change. My whole thing was, how can I manage that feeling of the game situation when it counts? And you think you can do it. You can never do it in practice. You have to have the real situation. And it was something that I got better at. But in my 18th year with the Eagles, I finally had a moment where I was like, wow, I think I just figured this out. We're playing in the NFC Championship game, 2002, and it's 20 degrees, blowing 20 miles an hour. And it's my third punt going into the wind. And I'm like out there and I stopped for a second. And I remember looking up in the stands like saying, wow, I've never felt this way before. I'm not even nervous. I know exactly what I want to do. I know exactly where I want the ball to go. I'm not caught up with what if. And it was a huge moment for me. Unfortunately, it was the last game I played. It really was a crazy time because I had so much more to offer, but timing just ran out. I was 41, 42. But had I had that feeling in my prior 18 years, there's no doubt I could have been a Hall of Fame type of punter, because what kept me from being really, really good was my nerves.
From the Holiday Bowl in San Diego, we wish you a very happy holiday season. Lee Johnson, barefooted punter. But I'll tell you this, that's an awfully good kick.
I was never a natural. It's amazing I had the career I had because I'm not this guy that wants the ball on the free throw line. So that game was when I realized, oh boy, do I want this in my life? Do I want this? Anxiety and fear of failure was my big motivator. And I realized in that game, when I had to kick the onside kicks, there were 3 onside kicks in that game of which one we returned. And I realized at that point, this is a big boy game. And you got to have big boy pants on to be good at it and play it. So it was a wake-up call for me in what was coming if I was going to become the guy at BYU. I always had the strongest leg. No one ever had a stronger leg than me, even in the NFL. And that's what Lavelle saw. He saw my ability to kick the ball far. That's why I kicked off that year in 1980. So that was how I became a starter on the team as a freshman, which is very unusual to start as a freshman. But he really didn't have a choice because I could kick the ball so far. So he wanted a guy who kicked the ball out of the end zone. I was a kickoff guy. I just kicked off. The onside kicks that I kicked were, you make them perfect or you don't get them. So I was super nervous. And the first one I did, I actually kicked backwards. And it was a terrible moment because we needed it. And I was a freshman and I didn't want to go out to kick the other ones. Coach was like, get your butt out there and you do what you're supposed to do. So that was the whole maturing, growing up phase for me when I realized that it was a big boy game, that you had to really be prepared for what's the pressure of what comes to the football game.
Hunting down, Johnson back on the 20, kicking from the 25, kicks it all the way to the 22 the other way.
Why would I let anxiety or fear take away from this God-given gift? I've got this gift to be the strongest leg in the NFL, and I've learned how to utilize that leg to be a really good player. And now I'm going to minimize my talent, my God-given talent, by anxiety? How stupid. And I think I was able to learn a way to manage that feeling and turn it into a strength as opposed to use it as a super bad weakness. And it affected many of my punts, just the anxiety. If I would start out a game good, then the anxiety would go away and the fear of failure would go away. But I think fear of failure was the hardest thing because you're a punter, you can change the game right there. You can change the outcome of a game, just like a kicker can. So that fear was overwhelming at times. I've had anxiety before, and this is not football-induced anxiety. This is just something that hit me like, whoa, what has happened to me? And the ability to manage tough situations, how to get through bad moments, and even in a game when you've hit your first two punts poorly and you got another huge punt, how to not ruin the whole game, how to turn things around in the midst of a storm is some of the lessons that I've learned through, I don't even know the word for it, but just recheck, reset, resetting your life. And every day you reset, whether it's through prayer or through scripture reading or whatever you're doing, you got to reset. You can't carry the previous day over with you.
Lee Johnson will try to kick the field goal. Allen holding. Johnson is 2 for 2 this year, field goals. The snap a little high, gets it down, however, and the kick is up, and it's right through there. Nice job that time by Mark Allen to get the high snap down.
College and pros are super different. College, you're a brotherhood. Pros, you're an employee surviving, you're trying to do your best. The Eagles, where we had good teams, they're very different than the bad teams of the Oilers, the Bengals, and it's in the locker room. They all have great athletes. You got to have a great quarterback. Those things don't happen without that. But the culture and the camaraderie and the connection and everyone's buying into the system, those are all the keys of good teams, great teams versus the bad teams. 84 was special. Interesting year because Steve had just finished. Now Robbie's coming in. And first-year guy. It's hard to really figure out, but we had the system. Lavelle had a masterful system, and it was iconic. Bill Walsh would come during spring ball to watch what we do. So you got an NFL legend, Bill Walsh, coming to our practice, like, what's Bill doing here? He's looking and learning what we're doing. So we have that system that Robbie just fits right in. Everybody just fits right in. But the special nature of the 84 season was the brotherhood that was there. First game against Pitt, everyone's standing around and someone says something. And I think it was Craig Garrick or one of the guys talked about, hey man, we win this game. There's no stopping us. There's no one in front of us that can beat us. And that means we could be undefeated, possibly national champs. The brotherhood was powerful. In my opinion, what makes a good team great is culture and brotherhood. No selfish activity. Everyone bought in. And it's powerful when you get a group of guys to come together who understand the game plan, understand the system, which Lavelle was masterful at. If everyone buys in, you can do some amazing things. That was 84 season.
Line of scrimmage, the 26-yard line. Johnson in to try the field goal. He's 3 out of 3 this year.
Old Thunderfoot doing pretty well.
So he'll be kicking from about the 33-yard line, 43-yard attempt.
There was one time this summer, Jay, I worked out with Lee and a friend of mine. We were out on the field, the practice field, and I wanted to see, Lee, how far can you kick a field goal? We kept moving back 5 yards at a shot. We got back to about 82 yards, and he kicked one through. So he has plenty of legs.
For how far?
82 yards.
82 yards.
Theoretically, you could get the ball at the 20, stall, not get a first down, and bring Lee Johnson in for a field goal.
I wasn't fully converted. I had a semi-testimony, but I wasn't converted. And I think over time, when I got my patriarchal blessing late. I might have been 24. And then meeting my fiance, my wife-to-be, was when I started to realize, oh man, it's time to figure this stuff out. So I had a wake-up call. I had some growing up to do. I was very spiritually immature. I was just living. I think just when clarity of what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be, the father I wanted to be, the husband I wanted to be, just the eternal perspective of begin with the end in mind. You kind of realize what it's all about. It honed me in. It gave me clarity on what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be. That was the strength of that recognition of, oh, my lady wants me to be a temple guy, so she's not going to marry me unless I'm in the temple. I want her to be dialed in and understand what it's all about. I didn't really understand the role that Christ could play in a person's life. You're taught, you're told, but I think you really do need to have a relationship. And once you have a relationship with what he wants out of you, what he can provide for you, and all he asks is that you just profess and say, hey, I know you. I know your role. I know what you did. And now go be your best. I think the most successful people know that someone has their back. That way you can push your limits knowing that someone's going to be there to lift you up and catch you. I think that's the role of Christ in a lot of ways, is you know he's got your back, which allows you to shoot for the stars. My advice would be make pressure your friend. Embrace it. You're not going to get around it in any phase. There's pressure to get up and give a sacrament talk. There's pressure to get good grades. There's pressure in life. And you got to be able to learn how to handle it on your own, but knowing that someone's got your back. Even though it took me 18 years to get comfortable with pressure, it might not take other people but 1 year to get comfortable with pressure. So put yourself in situations to feel pressure, to deliver under pressure, and just to make it your friend.
3rd and 10 then for Hawaii, still on the 34-yard line. Cherry with the ball, back to pass. This time they get to him. He will not slip away this time as Jim Herrmann and Larry Hamilton wrap him up.
I had an unbelievable childhood. I grew up in Wisconsin in a small Midwest town, and football, as far as I can remember, was something that I loved. This is Jim Herrmann, defensive end. Football's an interesting game, right? It's both as a young person and as an old person, because it's something that America has embraced and loves, and certainly was a huge part of my life. Probably am the only person you've had on your podcast who is a minority owner in an NFL franchise. We've had Packer season tickets for 50 years, my family, and we also own a share of the Green Bay Packers, a couple shares. My dad bought some for the family when we were really young in the 60s, the Ice Bowl. That was before there was a Super Bowl. It was the NFL championship game before they called it the Super Bowl. And so, yeah, I grew up in a really football-centric state from a NFL standpoint for sure. And then the University of Wisconsin was big. I pictured myself as a Green Bay Packer on a cold, snowy day, literally catching footballs with my dad and transposing that into the future, what that would mean if somehow I ever got a chance to play for the Green Bay Packers. So all those things are dreams that I think a lot of young people had, me included.
Well, that's a good effort by the BYU defense. They swarmed to the football pretty good. This is probably the best defensive team I've seen Lavelle Edwards have.
I was always the tallest kid in my class. I was always the youngest kid. My mom pushed me out the door at 4 because she's like, you're tall. Go to kindergarten with the rest of the kids. Somehow that'll all work out. And my mom was an educator. She should have known better. But I was a 17-year-old freshman at BYU going against returned missionaries, which I didn't know what that meant. But at the time, they were a little older than all the other kids and oftentimes bigger and more mature. I was raised Catholic in Wisconsin and got recruited to play football at BYU, really naively knowing very little about BYU. There was no one in my school or in the 30-mile radius that I could think of that was LDS. I didn't even know what that meant. You have to remember this was the 80s. There was no cell phone. There was no internet. The world was a really big place. There were 3.5 channels on TV. Really kind of wanted to stay home and go to Wisconsin, but they just weren't very good. But I still thought that's where I'm going to go. Roger French was at the University of Minnesota. Coach French said, hey, I'm going to this school out west. They win a lot. They have a great program, great staff. You should come check it out. So I came out on a recruiting trip, flew in on a Friday. I got to see BYU play Utah.
There it is, ladies and gentlemen, the final score in today's football game. Brigham Young 24, University of Utah 14.
It was a home game, and BYU won fairly easy. It was Jim McMahon's sophomore year. I'm like, oh, this is cool. It's a great stadium. It's beautiful, the mountains. The next day I got up and met with Coach Edwards. He offered me a scholarship, and I flew home. And I still wanted to take my other recruiting trips because I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. My mom and dad were very relaxed. And they weren't really pushing me anyway. They just said, well, you'll figure it out. You know, go where you feel it's good for you. Then on signing day, I went to school, and Coach French was sitting in our library at 7:30 in the morning and said, come on, let's do this. So I sat down at this library table with Coach French and I signed the scholarship. And then later in the day, Coach McLean, who was the head coach of Wisconsin, came in after school about 3:30, pulled me out of class. And I said, hey, I already signed with BYU. And he kind of looked at me perplexed, like, you did? And I said, yeah.
Goes down the left side, intercepted by Brigham Young, picked off at the 30-yard line.
I'm going to a school 3,000 miles away from home that I know very little about, and I don't know anyone there, and this is going to be really hard. And so got in my car and drove across country and pulled in. I stayed in a hotel the night before because I got in late. I didn't have time to check into the dorms. Got up, went to practice early. You got a little bag with kind of your shorts and your shirt and your socks, and I didn't have socks in my bag, and I was on the verge of tears. I'm super homesick, and I'm like, man, where am I, and how am I going to do this? And I heard a guy rummaging around behind me, and his locker, he was a senior offensive lineman from Idaho, and I turned around to ask him, hey, where do I go get my socks? And he was bent over looking through all his shoes in the bottom of his locker, and he was in the process of changing. And I'm like, it's really hot outside and you have long underwear on, which is really unique. But I really wasn't sure what this was about. And that kind of really was my first introduction to this is a different culture. This is going to be a really unique experience for me. That night, my roommate was talking about his parents who were coming up for education week, and his younger sister was there for EFY. And his brother was an RM that spent some time in the MTC, and he had a CTR ring on. And I'm like, my goodness, I need to start writing down all these acronyms because they're speaking a language that I know very little about. That was my introduction to the best 5 years of my life. I immediately met Steve Young and Lee Johnson, who ended up being my best friends and still are to this day. I talked to them every week, every day, just about. They were both in my wedding, I was in theirs, and it's just 50 other friends that I've made through my fraternity of BYU football, which I believe that's what it is.
It's far from being over. LaBelle Edwards' team made a gallant goal line stand right there to deny an equalizing or leading touchdown. So that's the end of halftime.
Like come April, I'm like, I'm out. I'm going to go home and see my family. I miss them so much. I miss my girlfriend. I miss my dog. I miss everything. I'm having a great time here, but I need to go back to my family and be in my comfort zone. And I think I'm certainly not going to put words in Steve and Lee's mouth, but they had some of those feelings, right? They were both homesick. We weren't great at being separated. Lee was probably had the most easiest transition. Steve was struggling. He had, I think, self-admitted separation anxiety from his family, and we all had feelings of that. And so I knew what day my last final was. Most of my stuff was packed. And I'm like, okay, my final ends, I can go home. I finished packing. And so Steve and Lee came over to help me throw stuff in my car. And we talked about working out, when training camp reporting is for next year. And then everything was loaded. And I turned around and looked at them, and I started crying. I'm like, why am I crying? Why am I crying? They're my buddies. But it really hit me that I had become a grown-up in a lot of ways. And these two guys standing in front of me were a huge part of it. What made 1984 unique, from my perspective, in 1980 was Jim McMahon's junior year, and we were 12-1 that year. And we lost the first game and then ran the table. Was we learned to win, and we learned to be a unit, and we learned to be a family, and we learned to be a fraternity and a brotherhood. And I know that sounds trite, but I think it's real. The SMU game, where we have, I think it's still ESPN ranks it one of the top 1 or 2 greatest comebacks in college football history. We were freshmen and saw Jim McMahon and the rest of the leaders on that team get punched in the mouth and regroup and be resilient and score 22 points in under 4 minutes and have this miraculous win. Prime example was 4th and 9. It was a crucial time, and Coach Edwards wanted a punt or kick, and Jim's just like, that's giving up. I'm running the time in my head, Coach, and we kick here. It's going to be really, really hard. Coach Edwards sent the punt team out, and Jim didn't come off the field. He was defiant, but not disrespectfully. And Coach Edwards, to his credit, respected him as the leader on the field and called a timeout. And Jim came over and said, Coach, this is what I think. This is what I think we can do. This is us getting this first down and then going down and scoring. And this is the first of what we need to do. And I'm like, wow, can you do that? I didn't know you could do that. And two, you're observing these players that just had this resolve and had this confidence that we can do this. And then the general, who oftentimes could get miffed or hurt, I'm saying we're going to punt, listened and said, if you feel good about it, I think I feel good about it. Let's get a play and let's go do this. That was hugely impactful to me. I remember Jim coming off the field and saying to the sideline, like, why is all the long faces? We're going to win this thing. Everyone relax. We got this. And I'm like, dude, are you looking at the scoreboard? And that's what I'm thinking. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, all right. Yeah, I get that. I get him. I can feel that it's sincere. And so I just think we were blessed to see and experience that. And so the next year, as sophomores, was Jim Jr. year. And I remember being in games where I thought, man, we are against the ropes here. Or we're like down a little bit. Or we're just not firing. But I'm like, I remember that SMU game. You know what? We're going to win this game. And we would win the game. And so by the time we were seniors, a lot of us had been together. A lot of us had seen those things time and time again.
3 seconds left. 3rd and 10 at the SMU 41-yard line. McMahon all the way back in his own 46, throwing for the end zone. Receivers are there. Defenders are there. It is in the end zone. Who has the ball? Touchdown!
I have 3 amazing sons, and we were happy and doing great. One day, my oldest son's like, hey, Dad, how come everyone that lives here is Mormon and we're not? I'm like, that's a good question. There's a long story behind all that. And so we started the discussion. I'm like, look, if you want to go to church, we can all go to church. I went to church for years with my buddies. It's great. You're going to love it. Let's go. So we started going to church. Obviously, it's your neighborhood. It's your whole social experience as well as your extended family. And I was raised in a deeply faithful home. My dad was a true believing Catholic. My mom was Episcopalian, whose dad was Mormon. Didn't know until my senior year in college. That's a whole nother story. After the Holiday Bowl, and my mom's like, hey, we're going to go see your Gramps and Grandma over in Arizona. You want to meet us there after the game? And then my mom's like, hey, we're going to go to church with Gramps in the morning. You cool with that? So we get up and we drive and we pull up to an LDS chapel. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? She's like, yeah, Gramps is LDS. I'm like, Mom, but again, I tell people this and they kind of like roll their eyes. My grandfather being LDS, although I knew very little about it, and he never really talked about it. And he'd talk a little bit about Utah, but by then he had been living in Philadelphia and played football at Penn and went to Wharton and lived in New York City and lived in New Jersey and lived in New York and worked for GE. And there's no question that me being in Utah, me going to BYU is absolutely tied to my grandfather's influence in my life. There's no question that going to BYU has changed my life drastically for the better in so many ways. I don't think it just happened. Whether you're Catholic or LDS or whatever your belief system is and however integrated it is into your life, people are always going to have ups and downs and highs and lows. And that's perplexing to me about faith, but it's also makes perfect sense. The beauty of it is it's so simple, but it's so hard, but it's really simple. We make it hard because of how we are and who we are and how we've been made and designed to have this experience. I don't want to wear it on my sleeve that I think God had a direct hand in me coming here, but I think God has a direct hand in pretty much everything we do.
Coming up next episode.
I vowed that I would never drop a ball again. And I know that sounds really corny coming out of there, but there were 73 balls that hit my hands in 1984. I caught 71 of them.
A year before, I was on a plantation in lava, trying to plant taro, taking it to the market to sell. And then all of a sudden, I'm on these great teams with great teammates. And we won the national championship. But only God could prepare a blessing like that.
Thank you for listening to Legends of 84. This podcast series was produced by Eric Michael Robertson and Scott Christofferson, with Bree Ray Alpew as associate producer. Music by Stuart Maxfield and Eric Michael Robertson. Legends of 84 is a production of BYU Radio.